The ATM receipt was still in his hand when my phone rang. My daughter Carolyn's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "What did you do?" she screamed before I could say a word. In the background, I could hear her husband Warren pacing, his voice low and frantic. It declined. It declined. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone to my ear, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not sadness, relief. Because in that moment, I understood something I had been slowly learning for 2 long years. They weren't panicking because the money was gone. They were panicking because they believed it was theirs. My name is Diane Mercer. I am 62 years old. I worked as a hospital administrator for 34 years. I gave that job everything. Early mornings, long evenings, weekends when my feet ached and my eyes burned. When I finally retired, the pension wasn't a gift. It was what I had earned, dollar by dollar, year by year. I had plans for that money. Small ones. A trip to the Pacific Northwest, a kitchen remodel, savings set aside for medical costs down the road. None of those plans included becoming a line item in my daughter's monthly budget. But that is exactly what happened. And it happened so slowly, I almost didn't notice, until it was too late. It started the way most things do, with a good reason. Carolyn called me on a Tuesday evening, about 3 months after I retired. She and Warren had just moved into a larger house in a newer neighborhood. The mortgage was higher than expected, and her hours at the dental office had been cut. "We're just a little short this month, Mom," she said. "Could you help with groceries?" I said yes without thinking twice. She was my daughter. Warren was working to build his client base. It was a rough patch. Every family has them. I sent $300 that same night and went to bed feeling like a good mother. I had no idea that phone call was the first stone in a wall they were quietly building around my retirement. By the 6th time Carolyn called asking for help, I started keeping a small notebook. Not because I was suspicious, just to remember. The amounts were never huge. 200 here, 150 there. Once it was for a car repair. Another time, it was for Sophie's school supplies. Sophie was my granddaughter, 8 years old and completely innocent in all of this. I never wanted to punish her. But one evening, I sat down and added up the numbers. In less than 6 months, I had sent them over $4,000. And not once had Carolyn asked if I could afford it. She had only asked if I would. That is a very different question. I just hadn't realized it yet. I still remember the afternoon I found the household planner. I was visiting Carolyn and Warren's house to drop off some of Sophie's winter clothes I'd stored from last season. Carolyn was at work. Warren let me in and went back to his home office. The planner was open on the kitchen counter. One of those color-coded binders people use to organize bills and grocery lists. I wasn't snooping. I was moving it aside to set down the bag. But the page fell open, and my eyes landed on a column labeled Monthly Fixed Income. Under it, in neat printed letters, were 2 entries. Warren's freelance contract, and below it, Mom's pension, $1,850. Fixed, scheduled, counted. My retirement had a category name in their home. I didn't say a word about the planner. I drove home, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe Carolyn was just being organized. Maybe seeing the numbers helped her plan ahead. But the more I sat with it, the more a quiet truth settled over me. They weren't hoping I would help. They were planning around the certainty that I would. My pension wasn't charity they were grateful for. It was income they depended on. And that changed everything about what we were doing. It wasn't me helping my daughter through a hard time. It was my daughter building a lifestyle on top of my retirement, without my permission, and without even asking. 3 weeks after I found the planner, I heard it. I had come over on a Saturday to spend the afternoon with Sophie. Carolyn was running errands. I was in the hallway pulling off my coat when Warren's voice floated out from the kitchen. He was on the phone, laughing. Easy, relaxed, like a man without a single worry. "Relax," he said. "Her pension hits Friday. We're covered." I froze. He didn't say, "Carolyn's mom is helping us out." He didn't say, "We really appreciate Diane." He said covered, like I was a utility payment. Like I was already built into the structure of their life. That word followed me home. It sat in my chest for days. Covered, by me, without my knowledge, without my say. That night, something shifted deep inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. Anger burns hot and fades. This was different. This was clarity. I lay in bed and turned the word over in my mind. Covered. I thought about the planner, the 10th phone call, the way Carolyn never asked how I was doing, only whether I could help. I thought about how I had never taken that trip to the Pacific Northwest. How my kitchen still looked the same as the day I retired. How I had been so busy being useful to them that I had forgotten to build the life I had worked 34 years to reach. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not confront them. I would not argue. I would be quiet. And I would be strategic. The following Monday, I walked into Lakeview Community Bank and opened a private savings account in my name only. I spoke to the accounts manager and told her exactly what I needed. Starting the following month, my pension would deposit directly into the new account. The shared account, the one I had kept for convenience, the one Carolyn and Warren had connected a card to with my blessing for emergencies, would receive nothing new. I didn't close it right away. I left a small balance, just enough not to raise a flag too soon. Then I drove home, made dinner, and said nothing. Not a single word to anyone. The quiet felt powerful in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had spent 2 years being available. Now I was being invisible, on purpose. 2 days later, I sat across from an estate attorney named Mr. Calloway at his office on Birchwood Avenue. He had silver hair, reading glasses, and the kind of steady patience that made me feel like my words mattered. I told him everything: the planner, the transfers, the phone call, the word covered. He listened without interrupting. Then he said calmly, "You've been supporting them, not gifting them. There's a legal distinction, and for estate planning purposes, it matters considerably." We spent 2 hours going through my existing will. The document I had signed 9 years ago, after my husband passed, left everything to Carolyn. Mr. Calloway and I were about to change that, carefully, legally, and completely. We established a revocable living trust. Mr. Calloway walked me through every detail. A trust means your assets don't pass directly to a person when you die. They pass through rules you write yourself, rules that stay private, that don't go through probate, and that hold up firmly under U.S. law. I wrote mine carefully. Sophie, my granddaughter, would receive a protected fund held until she turned 25, designated for education or a first home. The rest of my estate, including the house, would be distributed by the trust's terms. One of those terms addressed financial dependency. If a named beneficiary had been receiving regular financial support from me in the 2 years before my death, their distribution would be adjusted accordingly. Mr. Calloway looked up from the page. "That," he said quietly, "is a very thoughtful clause." It was, because I had written it with 2 years of very clear evidence. There was one Marie I kept returning to, as I worked through all of this. 8 months earlier, Carolyn had mentioned that she and Warren were thinking of taking Sophie to the beach for a long weekend. She said they were a little tight on funds. I offered to help cover the trip, $500, sent the same day she asked. 2 weeks later, the photos went up online. The 3 of them on the sand. Warren with a cold drink, Sophie laughing at the waves. They looked happy, genuinely happy, and I was glad Sophie had that day, truly. But Carolyn never called to say thank you. She sent a single text with a small sun emoji. That was all. $500, 1 sun emoji, no thank you. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the money. It was the invisibility. My neighbors on Clover Lane thought I was living a comfortable, peaceful retirement. They saw me come and go. They saw Carolyn visit with Sophie sometimes on Sundays. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly cutting my own expenses for months to keep sending money I couldn't really afford to spare. I switched to a cheaper grocery store. I put off fixing a slow leak under the kitchen sink. I turned down an invitation to join a retired women's travel group because I told myself I couldn't afford it. None of that was because I was poor. It was because I kept placing their comfort above my own. And no one knew. Because Carolyn never asked. After I found the planner, I went back and looked at it one more time on a later visit. This time, I quietly took a photo with my phone. I wanted to see it clearly, not just from memory, where emotions can blur things. The column read exactly as I remembered. Mom's pension, $850, guaranteed income. I zoomed in on those 2 words, Guaranteed. Income. I was not a mother in that column. I was not even a person. I was a number. A reliable one. As though I had signed an employment contract with their household. As though my 34 years of work existed to fund their life. That photo stayed on my phone for weeks. Every time doubt crept in about what I was doing, every time I wondered if I was being too hard, I looked at it. Then the doubt passed. Before I redirected the pension completely, I ran one quiet test. In late October, I delayed my usual transfer by 5 days. I said nothing to Carolyn. I simply waited and watched. On day 3, she texted, "Hey Mom, everything okay? Haven't seen anything come through yet." I replied that I had been busy and would get to it soon. On day 4, Warren called, not to ask how I was doing, not to check on my health, to ask about the transfer. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short and carefully polite, but the anxiety underneath was impossible to hide. The moment I heard the worry in his voice over a 5-day delay, over $200, I understood the full weight of what had been built on top of me. I wasn't Mom anymore. I was income. And there was no going back from knowing that. I signed the revised will and trust documents on a Thursday afternoon in November. Mr. Calloway's assistant brought in 2 witnesses. I read every page before I signed. I didn't rush. I had always been careful with important things: lease agreements, insurance policies, my retirement paperwork. But this was perhaps the most important document I had ever put my name to. Because every other document I had signed was about building something. This one was about protecting it. Protecting what I had built over 34 years from being quietly assumed away by people who loved the comfort I provided more than they considered the cost to me. I pressed the pen to the signature line. I signed my full name, Diane Louise Mercer. And I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like myself again. The following Friday, the pension did not arrive in the shared account. It landed in my private account at Lakeview, exactly as arranged. I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee when my phone began lighting up. First a text from Carolyn, then another, then a call I let go. Then Warren called. I let that pass too. 20 minutes later, Carolyn called again. This time I answered. Her voice was high and unsteady. "Something is wrong with the account, Mom. Warren's card was declined at the ATM. Can you check what happened?" I told her to take a breath. I told her the account was fine. I said calmly and clearly, "The money is just somewhere else now." There was a pause, a long one. The kind of pause that means someone is starting to understand something they don't want to understand. She came to my house the next morning without calling ahead. I heard the car in the driveway and watched from the window as she walked to the front door. She didn't knock gently. She knocked the way people knock when they are scared and trying to cover it with anger. I opened the door. Her eyes were red. "What is going on?" she said. "We have bills due. Warren's contract payment got pushed back. We needed that transfer, Mom." I stepped aside and let her in. I put the kettle on while she talked. I let her say everything she needed to say. She felt blindsided. She said I was being cold. She said this wasn't fair. I listened to all of it without raising my voice. Then I set 2 mugs on the table and said quietly, "Carolyn, sit down. I need to show you something." And I showed her the photo of the planner. I told her everything, slowly, clearly. I told her about the planner and the column labeled guaranteed income. I told her about Warren's phone call. The word covered, the easy laugh, the certainty in his voice. I told her about the beach trip and the sun emoji. I told her about the grocery store switch. The leaking sink I hadn't fixed. The travel group I had turned down. I didn't say any of it with anger. I said it the way you described something that happened. Not something you're still bleeding from. When I finished, I said, "I didn't just change the account, Carolyn. I changed what happens when I'm no longer here." She stared at me. I watched her face move through several things at once. Shock, then confusion, then something slower and heavier. The beginning of understanding. Outside, a bird was calling from the oak tree in the yard. The kitchen was very quiet. "The house," she said finally. Her voice was different now. Smaller. "What did you change about the house?" I told her the truth. The house was in the trust now. It would not pass to her automatically. It would transfer according to terms I had written. Terms that accounted for the financial dynamic that had existed between us in the 2 years before my death. I watched it settle over her. For 2 years, Carolyn had been quietly assuming she knew the shape of her future. She knew the pension arrived on Fridays. She knew the house would come to her one day. She had organized her entire life around certainties that were never hers to claim. In one conversation, those certainties were gone. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing access. I saw that truth clearly now, and so did she. 3 days later, they both came. Carolyn and Warren sat side by side on my living room sofa, careful and still. Warren spoke more than I expected. He said they hadn't meant for things to become what they had become. He said it had started as temporary, and they had just fallen into it. He used those exact words. Fallen into it. As though my retirement savings had been a ditch beside the road, and they had simply tripped and tumbled in without noticing. I told him I believed he hadn't planned to take advantage of me. But I also told him that not planning a harm doesn't undo it. I was not there to negotiate a return to what things had been. I was offering something harder and more valuable. A boundary, and a real chance to build something honest between us for the first time in 2 years. The months that followed were uncomfortable for everyone, including me. Carolyn and Warren had to look at their actual budget for the first time, without my pension quietly holding up the bottom. Warren pushed forward a client proposal he had been putting off for over a year. Carolyn picked up extra hours at the dental office. It wasn't easy. I wasn't pretending otherwise. I watched from a careful distance. I still called. I still saw Sophie on weekends. I still showed up. But I did not send money. Not once. And something unexpected happened. Carolyn started calling just to talk, not to ask for help, not to mention a bill. Just to talk. The calls were short at first, cautious. Then they got longer. And slowly, they became something that felt like the relationship I had always wanted with my daughter, but had quietly traded away for the role of reliable deposit. 4 months after I changed the account, Warren landed the contract. A 6-month consulting agreement, solid pay, and it led directly to a second one. Carolyn received a raise at the dental office, small but real. They didn't pay back what they had taken from me. I didn't ask them to. But Carolyn did something that surprised me. She came over on a Sunday evening, carrying a homemade chicken casserole. The same dish I had taught her to make from my mother's old recipe card when she was a teenager. We sat at my kitchen table and ate together. At the end of the evening, she said quietly, "I didn't see it, Mom. I really didn't see what we were doing to you." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "I know," I said. "That's why I had to show you." We sat there a while longer after that. Neither of us needed to say anything more. By the time winter settled in, the bigger house, the one with the mortgage that had started all of this, had become impossible for them to justify. They moved to a smaller place in the same school district so Sophie wouldn't have to change schools. Carolyn called to tell me herself. She didn't complain. She didn't frame it as a loss. She said it was the right move. She said it felt better to live inside what they actually earned. I was proud of her for saying that. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in 2 years. I thought about that planner, my name under guaranteed income, and I thought about how far we had both traveled from that page. The category was gone. In its place, slowly and imperfectly, we were building something real, something that didn't depend on a Friday deposit to hold together. Now I sit on my back porch in the late afternoon, and the garden is finally getting the attention it always deserved. There are dahlias coming in along the fence where there used to be overgrown weeds. I have a trip to the Pacific Northwest booked for spring, just me and a small group of women. I met through the travel club I finally joined. My pension lands in my account each month and stays there until I decide where it goes. The trust sits with Mr. Calloway, clear, fair, and firm. Sophie came over last Saturday and helped me plant tomatoes along the back bed. She asked if we could do it again next weekend. I said yes. Definitely yes. I didn't make the changes I made to punish my daughter. I made them to remind her and myself that I was still here. Still a person, not a payment. The money had stopped, and so had I. But then slowly, something better began.